Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, uh, we're going back in time to the 1960s, to Houston, a world of big oil money, lavish parties, and a dark secret. Lurking beneath the surface, we're going to unpack the story of Joan Robinson Hill, this woman. She seemingly had it all: beauty, wealth, and a passion for horses. She actually won over 500 trophies in riding competitions.
That's right. She was a true champion in the equestrian world. But, Joan's life wasn't just about trophies and blue ribbons. It was deeply intertwined with her powerful father, Ash Robinson, this man. He adored his daughter, but perhaps he wielded a bit too much influence over her life.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder how much of Joan's life was truly her own. So we have her championship riding career, a doting but possibly overbearing father. What else do we know about Joan's early life?
Well, Joan attended the prestigious Miss Porter's School in Connecticut. It's the same boarding school that Jacqueline Kennedy attended. It kind of paints a picture of a very privileged upbringing, surrounded by the elite of society. And even in college, Ash's influence was apparent. He leased a hotel suite near Joan's campus, just so they wouldn't be apart.
Wow, that's intense. Talk about close relationship. It seems like Ash was determined to keep Joan within his orbit. Did this protectiveness extend to Joan's romantic relationships?
Absolutely. Joan's journey through marriage
Yeah.
is fascinating and frankly a bit heartbreaking. Her first two marriages were short-lived. The first was to a military man, Spike Benton, and Ash actively discouraged this. And then the second marriage was to a man named Cecil Blaffer. And this was a union. It was seemingly orchestrated by Ash and quickly dissolved under his pressure. It really makes you question how much autonomy Joan had in choosing her partners.
Yeah. It's almost like she was living in a gilded cage, surrounded by luxury, but with limited freedom. And then comes John Hill, the charismatic surgeon, who, surprisingly, gets Ash's blessing. What do we know about him and his relationship with Joan?
John was an ambitious up-and-comer in the Houston medical scene. He was charming, accomplished, and importantly, he came from a respectable family, which seemed to be a point that Ash valued. Their courtship played out like a society fairy tale, culminating in a lavish wedding on Ash's sprawling estate. But as we dig deeper, you'll see that even fairy tale settings can't always disguise trouble brewing beneath the surface.
Okay, so there are already some red flags here. Controlling father, two failed marriages, and now a seemingly perfect third husband. I have a feeling things are about to take a turn for the worse. Where do we go from here?
Well, let's look at what happens once the honeymoon phase wears off. John, he was driven by his career and his passion for music. He was actually an accomplished classical pianist for it. Starts spending less and less time with Joan, and then Joan discovers that he's having an affair with a woman named Ann Kerr. This discovery, along with John's growing emotional distance, sends their marriage into a tailspin.
Oh, I bet that didn't sit well with Ash. Knowing his tendency to intervene, I can only imagine how he reacted to John's infidelity.
You're right, Ash did not take it well. In fact, sources suggest that he actively interfered in the couple's attempts to reconcile, even allegedly drafting a letter from John to Joan, vowing to end the affair. It's a very complicated situation where you see the lines between love, control, and manipulation blurring.
So the marriage is falling apart. Ash is meddling, and Joan is undoubtedly heartbroken. It seems like the perfect storm for disaster. What happens next?
Tragically, Joan falls violently ill. Her symptoms are baffling: high fever, vomiting, disorientation. Even John, a skilled surgeon, seems unsure how to handle the situation. He initially treats her at home, claiming to have broken her 106-degree fever, but delays taking her to the hospital, and this delay becomes a crucial point of contention in the case.
That's a shocking detail. A fever that high is incredibly dangerous, especially if it's not coming down. Why wouldn't he rush her to the hospital immediately, given his medical background?
It's a question that haunts this case. Some speculate that John, perhaps arrogant in his abilities, truly believed he could manage her care at home. Others suggest a more sinister motive, that he intentionally delayed seeking proper medical help. Whatever the reason, the consequences were devastating. Joan resides just hours after being admitted to the hospital.
This is where the mystery really takes hold, right? We have a sudden death, a delayed trip to the hospital, and a husband who seems suspiciously nonchalant about the whole situation.
Exactly, and things get even more complicated when the initial autopsy points to hepatitis as the cause of death. But then a panel of medical experts, brought in at Ash's insistence, disputes this finding. They see no evidence of hepatitis and call for further investigation.
Wait, so the initial autopsy was potentially wrong. That raises serious questions about the competency of the investigation, and it fuels Ash's suspicions even further. What happens next?
Driven by grief and a burning desire to expose what he believes to be the truth. Ash throws his considerable resources into uncovering what really happened to his daughter. He hires a former district attorney, known for his tenacity, and pushes for a grand jury investigation. And this leads to Joan's body being exhumed for a third autopsy.
This is a turning point in the case, isn't it? The exhumation and third autopsy are huge developments,
Right.
and they bring to light some truly disturbing details.
Absolutely. The third autopsy, while ultimately inconclusive, shifts the focus to a shocking legal charge, murder by neglect. This rarely used tactic highlights Joan's inaction. As Joan's illness spiraled, the prosecution argues that Joan, as a doctor, should have recognized the severity of Joan's condition and sought immediate medical care.
This murder by neglect charge is fascinating. It's not about intent to kill, but about a reckless disregard for a person's life, leading to their death. In this case, it's about whether Joan, as Joan's husband and a medical professional, failed to provide her with the care she desperately needed.
Right. The prosecution points to his delay in taking her to the hospital, his insistence on treating her at home, despite her alarming symptoms, and his overall lack of urgency as evidence of his negligence. It's a novel legal approach, and one that puts Joan squarely in the hot seat.
So the stage is set for a dramatic trial. We have a grieving father determined to get justice, a controversial legal strategy, and a defendant whose actions have raised serious questions. What happens when the case goes to court?
The first trial becomes a media frenzy. The public is captivated by the story of a beautiful socialite, a charming but potentially sinister husband, and a powerful father seeking revenge. The prosecution's case relies heavily on circumstantial evidence and innuendo, focusing on John's actions and his seemingly callous demeanor.
And then comes the bombshell testimony of John's former mistress,
Right.
Ann Kerr. She accuses him of not only being unfaithful, but also of attempting to murder her on multiple occasions.
Yes. Anne's testimony is explosive. She paints a picture of John as a dangerous and manipulative man, capable of violence and willing to silence those who threaten his carefully constructed facade. However, her dramatic accusations backfire. The jury finds her testimony unreliable, and the trial ends in a mistrial.
So John escapes conviction, at least for now. But the cloud of suspicion hangs heavy over him. What happens to him after the mistrial? Does he lay low, try to rebuild his life away from the spotlight?
Not exactly. In a move that shocks even those who believe in his innocence, John marries Anne. Just weeks after the mistrial, it's a baffling decision that further alienates him from Houston society and fuels public speculation about his true nature.
Wow, that's bold,
Yeah.
to say the least. It's like he's thumbing his nose at public opinion, defying the whispers and accusations that swirl around him. But I can't imagine Ash is going to let him get away with this so easily. What's next in this twisted saga?
Well, before we get to Ash's response, another tragedy strikes. John's brother, Julian, is found dead under mysterious circumstances. It's a devastating blow for John, adding another layer of grief and complexity to his already tumultuous life.
This is where John's life seems to spiral even further. He's battling a tarnished reputation, mounting legal fees, the constant threat of retrial, and now he's dealing with the loss of his brother. It's a recipe for instability. How does he cope?
His coping mechanisms are, questionable, to say the least. He throws himself into work, trying to salvage his medical career. But he also seeks solace in the arms of another woman, Connie Lauby. He even considers marrying Connie before the retrial, a move that his own lawyer has to talk him out of.
It seems like he's either incredibly reckless or completely oblivious to how his actions are perceived,
Right.
or maybe it's a combination of both. Either way, it doesn't exactly paint him in a favorable light. So we have a retrial looming, a new romance, and a grieving brother who seems to be making one bad decision after another. Where does this leave us?
It leaves us on the precipice of another shocking turn of events. John, despite his legal woes and personal turmoil, continues to live his life with a sense of defiance, but his world is about to be turned upside down in a way he could never have anticipated.
This is where things take a truly dark and unexpected turn, right? I have a feeling we're about to enter the final act of this tragic story. So here we are. John's life is unraveling, and the retrial is hanging over him like a sword. What happens next?
It's almost too unbelievable to be true. John is brutally murdered in his own home. And, to make matters worse, his 12-year-old son Robert witnesses the whole horrific event.
That's just devastating. A child witnessing his father's murder, it's almost too awful to comprehend. What was the initial response from the police?
Well, initially, the police focused on robbery as a motive. It seemed like an open and shut case. But as they delved deeper, things didn't quite add up. Valuables were left untouched, and the intruders seemed solely focused on John.
Okay, so something doesn't feel right. It's too
Right.
precise. Too targeted for a random robbery. What happens next?
The investigation takes a wild turn when the murder weapon is traced back to a doctor who claims it was stolen by a sex worker he hired.
Hold on, it gets even more convoluted. What's the connection to this doctor?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. And just when you think it can't get any stranger, a woman named Leila Paulus enters the picture. She starts briding that she orchestrated John's murder.
Okay, so we've got a stolen murder weapon, a mysterious woman claiming responsibility, and a dead man who was already surrounded by suspicion and scandal. What did the police make of Leila's claims?
At first, they dismissed her as an attention seeker, but as they dig deeper, they uncovered this twisted web of connections between Leila, her alleged accomplices, and John Hill.
So what was Leila's motives? Why would she target John?
Well, it seems Leila was convinced that John was responsible for Joan's death. Despite his acquittal in the first trial, she saw herself as a vigilante, delivering justice where the legal system had failed.
Wow, so she took the law into her own hands. That's chilling. Did they have any concrete evidence linking Leila to the murder?
They did. One of her accomplices, Bobby Van Diver, confesses to the murder and provides specific details that corroborate the evidence. It seemed like they finally had their break in the case, but then...
Oh, I know that tone. Another twist.
The tragic one. Before Bobby can testify, he's killed in a shootout with police.
So their key witness is gone. What does that mean for the case against Leila?
Well, without Bobby's testimony, the prosecution's case crumbles. The charges against Leila and her associates are eventually dropped due to lack of evidence. And so, the mystery of John Hill's death remains unsolved.
So we're left with two unsolved deaths, a tangled web of relationships, and a whole lot of unanswered questions. But there's one more piece of this puzzle we need to examine. Earlier, we talked about John's delayed response to Joan's illness. Years later, a new medical condition emerged that could shed light on Joan's baffling symptoms. Toxic shock syndrome.
That's right. TSS, as it's known, wasn't identified until the late 1970s, several years after Joan's death. It's characterized by a sudden onset of high fever, vomiting, diarrhea, confusion, and it can rapidly progress to multi-organ failure if left untreated.
And those symptoms sound eerily similar to what Joan experienced. Do experts believe that TSS could have been the real cause of her death?
It's certainly a possibility, some medical professionals, looking back at Joan's case through the lens of modern medical knowledge, believe that TSS could explain her rapid decline and the puzzling array of symptoms.
So if Joan died from TSS, it reframes the entire narrative, doesn't it? It means she wasn't murdered at all, but was the victim of a then unknown medical condition.
It does, and it throws John's actions into a different light as well. While he might still be considered negligent for delaying medical care, he wasn't intentionally harming her. He was a doctor. But he was also a man dealing with a medical mystery that, at the time, had no known solution.
That's a heartbreaking thought, John. Wrongly accused, hounded by the press and by Joan's father,
Yeah.
and ultimately murdered, perhaps because of a medical condition no one understood at the time.
The possibility of TSS adds another layer of tragedy to this already complex case. It highlights the limits of human understanding, even in the realm of medicine.
The Joan Robinson Hill case is a story of wealth and privilege, but also of love, loss, and the relentless pursuit of truth. It's a case that continues to fascinate and frustrate, leaving us with more questions than answers.
It's a reminder that the truth can be elusive. And sometimes, even with all the resources in the world, we're left with only speculation and unanswered questions.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the life and death of Joan Robinson Hill. It's a story that stayed with us long after researching it, and we hope it sparked your curiosity as well. We encourage you to explore the many books and documentaries available on this case and draw your own conclusions. What do you believe happened to Joan? Was it a medical mystery, a sinister plot, or something else entirely?
And if you enjoyed this deep dive, be sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more explorations of captivating true crime stories and historical mysteries. We'll be back next week with a new case that's sure to keep you on the edge of your seat. Until then, keep those minds curious and stay tuned.